Change. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deirdre Lee, and I'm from a company called Dairylinks in Ireland. Is it okay for the interpreters here and everything? And so Dairylinks helps public agencies to make better use of their data. So as we've heard from Alejandro, that data is very important for all aspects of government. So the cost of the 3,600 person days for cleaning up data, that we hope to be able to address that and help government agencies with this. So the global trend that I'm going to talk about today is data, and specifically data in governments. So Commissioner Neelie Kroes, the outgoing European Commissioner for the Digital Agenda, likened data to black gold, or as oil was likened to black gold. Data is a valuable resource in this digital age. So really kind of highlighting how important it is kind of moving forward on the European Commission agendas and really across all governments. But when we talk about data, there's lots of different buzzwords that are going on at the moment, from big data, linked data, social media data, and so on. So what I want to kind of focus on in this talk is specifically around open data and open government data. It was highlighted as well by the G8 summit this year in Fermanagh in Ireland, when the G8 leaders came together and they defined the G8 Open Data Charter, where they outlined best practice principles for open data, what they wanted to achieve, the grand vision for all of these countries together, from open by default, so that all data should be published as open data by default, that it should be usable by all, of good quality, for transparency and also for innovation purposes. So this was a good kind of political leadership stamp on the importance of open data. And for those maybe not exactly familiar with what we mean when we say open data, it was defined here by Open Knowledge, so an international body that works a lot on open knowledge. And they define open data as, they define open as in general. Open means anyone can freely access, use, modify and share for any purpose, subject at most to requirements that preserve provenance and openness. So really that it's free for anyone, so no cost associated with it, and that anyone can use it for transparency purposes, innovation purposes, or so on. So this is kind of where we're coming from when we mean open data. And it can be related to lots of different sectors, so from environment, transport, education, infrastructure, and so on. So it can be related to any kind of public service domain. But important with open data is that it's not personal data. So it's data that maybe comes from kind of aggregate or statistical information, but information that isn't about a particular individual, so doesn't impose or go against any data restriction or data protection legislation. So there's lots of examples and lots of research and practice going into, well, how is open data being used now? And around business or open data for business or for innovation, which is very important because one of the main motivations or benefits of open data is to improve innovation. So there's some companies, Andrew Stott already this morning mentioned around the Climate Corporation, that started off as a company for insurance for farmers, agriculture insurance, and then developed into this company around precision agriculture, and it was kind of bought out by Monsanto then, but they use completely based on open data. Building Eye is an Irish company that provides planning application information across many different cities, including San Francisco and so on across America. And Transport API is a UK, a London-based company that takes transport open data from many different sources and provides that as a stream, and has over 400 developers using it now. So I just wanted to give a couple of quick examples of the business use of open data. But as we've kind of heard already, that there's a lot more to e-government than just the technical side of things. So we like to look at open data as an ecosystem, so lots of different elements. So for sure there's the technical, from the using what specific formats, standards, metadata, things like that are very important to define. But then also the other elements like licensing, data protection, promotion of the data, data usage, encouraging it and so on. So it's really tying in all these elements together that hopefully develop a sustainable system. So I guess coming back to kind of the talk as well, and coming back to government usage of data, and how this kind of trend or this buzzword of open data, how can governments harness that and utilise that to improve general data usage within governments? Because there's always going to be a danger that open data might be seen as something over there, that a project or an initiative that will be done in exclusion maybe of other aspects of government, that will have our portal, will put data up there, and great, that will keep the open data advocates happy. But I guess what really should be happening is that we look at it kind of in its entirety, and we look at how we can leverage the open data initiatives to improve data quality overall. Alejandro went into a lot of detail around the different challenges around data quality and agreement and standards and so on. And this is really imperative that now that there is this push and motivation around open data, that it can be used to improve data quality overall. Because now, I mean, I meet with public agencies and public bodies, and suddenly they're starting to think about data, and maybe they didn't beforehand. And so they see it as, Neelie Krustis described, as a resource, as something that can really be integrated into all aspects. So it's really about seeing, okay, open data might be the tip of the iceberg, but what's really important here is looking at the overall data life cycles, data processes, and what public services, how can we enhance all of our public services with better data quality in general. And great, open data might be a subset of that. The non-personal data that we can publish is a great bonus. So some of the closed data that maybe wouldn't be published as open data, so personal information, security information and so on, but this is data that is still necessary to maybe share between public bodies to improve the public services for citizens. A couple of the challenges that governments face when thinking about data in general around kind of the resources that are available, especially in kind of countries that are hit with the economic crisis, such as our own, such as Ireland, that there's not as much resources available. But then, I mean, that can also be an opportunity for innovation. As Denko pointed out, there's great kind of innovation that can be gleaned from times of maybe financial crisis. Data protection is also very important when you're talking about data. Sure, open data doesn't refer to personal data, but you have to make sure that that data then isn't personal and so on. The governance, so who's going to be responsible for the control and sharing of the data. Organisational change is a massive factor, changing the culture within public bodies. And then looking at, well, who's using the data? Because we want maybe a demand-driven approach to really kind of focus on the data that we know will be used. And of course, the quality of the data as well, that is not, maybe lots of gaps in it or errors, or it's not up to date. Okay, so for the rest of the presentation, I'm just going to give some examples of different data usage of governments. I call it here data-savvy government initiatives. So some are open data, some are closed data, some are mixed. But just some examples of governments that are using and thinking and looking at data. So the first is the Health Data Palooza. And it's an annual event. There's over 2,000 practitioners come to this event. And Paul mentioned before the gap between the techies and the practitioners in the field, in the social service. So the Health Data Palooza was created exactly for that. So it was to bring together all of the practitioners from the government agencies, from academia, from the companies, from civil society organisations, anyone who has any interest in health and health data. So it's not necessarily open data that they're discussing and dealing with. Some of it could be, but it could also be closed data or research data for health, medicinal, bioinformatics, any kind of purposes. But to bring everyone together at this annual event, that they can discuss together and try and close that gap a little bit. In Denmark, they have kind of focused on good basic data. So this kind of means core pillars of data, or really kind of the base registries of common data that is used a lot or referred to a lot by lots of different public agencies, like company data, address data, map data, things like that. So they really kind of define them, and that they can be reused easily. These were from my understanding, were started off as kind of internal data registries, but now in the last couple of years they're working to make them open as well, so that they can be used not just by public agencies, but by everyone. And one example of this is the address data, which actually was released, what we would call now as open data, so free of charge in 2002. So they were kind of revamping the address system and deciding, well, okay, who would be responsible for the space registry, and who's going to manage the pricing, licensing, dissemination, distribution of it. And they said, would they, I guess, had the foresight to see the potential benefits if they just release it for free. And ultimately they did a study in 2010 to see, well, how effective this was. And so the cost of releasing this data for free was about 2.3 million. And what they came back, or the return on this investment, in direct impact, they estimated to be 63 million. And that was in 2010. And then based on that study, they've extended the initiative and project and really improved the data and the infrastructure around it. I'd throw in an Irish example. So in Ireland we have the Irish Spatial Data Exchange. So in Ireland we have a very active geospatial community, and they have a lot of quality data between research institutes like the Marine Institute, Geological Survey of Ireland, government departments, private companies even. But they needed a way to be able to discover data and to share data and agree on standards and so on, so that the data could be easily reused. And so they came up with this Irish Spatial Data Exchange platform where you can discover, search and share data. And this is actually now accessible via the Irish National Data Portal. In Estonia, they have the X-Road system. And this is, I mean, it's the backbone really of all of the public service provision in Estonia. It's really very impressive that I think there's over 200 services, right? Over 2,000 services are now based on X-Road. So it's the sharing of, it facilitates the sharing of all data between public bodies. So that is completely closed data, you could say. I'm not sure if they have any plans for opening up any of that. In Korea, there's the e-people system. So this relates, I guess, to there not being a common complaint system across all. So if you want to make a complaint or a comment to any public body, you'd have to know, okay, well, what body is responsible for this public service that I want to complain about, and they wouldn't have a consistent approach. So e-people addresses that, and that there's one common place that a citizen can go. They can make a complaint, but there's also an option to discuss different policy items or create a petition or so on. So it's a common place of kind of engaging citizens around public services. So that's kind of the citizen-facing data usage. So only two more examples. So in Rio, I think this is a great example of the data science team in the city of Rio de Janeiro. So they used the closed data and the data that they were collecting as a city, but they combined it with social media data to figure out there was a cause of, they had a problem with dengue fever and they wanted to reduce this. So using the data available to them, combining, so for example, about sewage locations or where rubbish was being collected or so on, and they combined that with social media information, and they could pinpoint some of the outbreaks of dengue fever, and they managed to reduce deaths in 1 year by 93%, which I think is pretty amazing. And in the UK, so this is an example of a kind of a citizen seeing their own data, so the transparency element. So the data concerns only one particular citizen, the DVLA, the View Driving License. So you can log onto the system, see your driving license information, what you're allowed to do, if you have any penalty points or so things like that. So you're able to access your own information as a citizen, which I think is very powerful. So ultimately, really the message is that good data is good data, and good data practices are good data practices across the board. So it could refer to open data, to closed data, and if possible, if there is a push or a motivation or excitement around open data, then great. Why not use that, utilize that, leverage it to improve data practices across the board? That's it. Thank you very much.